Most American adults, in terms of their Christian faith, are not moving forward. They are where they are, and the research I've been doing shows that they pretty much stick there.
You did mention something in there that I thought was interesting. You said small groups are inadequate for building disciples. And I want to touch on that because I need to ask you, what then is the role of the church, and how would you structure discipleship in the church?
Let me answer it this way. The book that I'm writing, one of the 3 books I'm working on now, it is about how do you disciple adults. It's incredibly difficult because very few adults have a biblical worldview. And if you don't have a biblical worldview, it's virtually impossible, at least based on my research, looking at the 6 factors Jesus gave us about how do you describe or define a disciple, virtually impossible without a biblical worldview. Because if you're not thinking like Jesus, you're not going to act like him. So you got to go there. So as I've been looking at discipleship and what actually works in the process, the one thing that small groups do that's very helpful toward building disciples is it facilitates relationships. Mm-hmm. And discipleship is all about relationship. But what I've discovered is that small groups, that's about where they end in terms of their value for building disciples, typically. I mean, obviously, exceptions all the time, but sure. Typically, they're not very helpful. Why? Because it's a group of people sitting around sharing their ignorance. What I've found is that disciples get made by somebody who, let's say, on a discipleship scale of 1 to 10, is an 8, looks back at the individuals that he knows and finds somebody who, on that same discipleship scale, might be a 5, 6, 7, and goes to them and says, you know what, I'd like to hang out with you because I think that we could help each other in our spiritual walk. And that person's intention is to download for them whatever it is that they've learned that's gotten them up to stop 8 on that journey. Mm-hmm. He or she wants to grab them by the hand or the shoulder and help them move forward on that pathway. Most American adults, in terms of their Christian faith, are not moving forward. They are where they are. And the research I've been doing shows that they pretty much stick there for years and years and years. They don't make much progress. Why? Because what we do in churches doesn't help them. You know, we preach at them. We put them in small groups, which frankly are designed for 2 primary purposes, one of which is to build relationships among those people so people feel connected to the church.
Right.
And that relates to the second reason, which is to keep them coming to the church. But it's really not about discipleship. And so, you know, if we want discipleship, number one, there's got to be a relationship between a more mature disciple and a less mature disciple. It's got to be one-on-one. It's got to be a situation where they meet frequently and they talk about all aspects of life, because discipleship covers every dimension of who you are and how you live. And what the discipler needs to be doing is intentionally thinking about whatever the issues are in the life or the challenges in the life of the person that I'm discipling. I want to understand them. I want to be sympathetic to them, but I want to be bringing God's word into them. And I need to be modeling for that person I'm discipling how I deal with those same kinds of challenges, not because I'm perfect, but because maybe I've learned a thing or two that would help that other individual to grow, to move down the pathway of spiritual maturity, biblical maturity. And that's my job. A great discipler is a master at Socratic dialogue. Now, Socratic dialogue is kind of a fancy term for don't tell people what to do, just ask them questions about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And through that then breaks down the defenses of the person that you're discipling and makes them curious about the things that you're asking about. You're asking them why they do something. You're asking them why or how they came to that conclusion that that was the best thing to do. And eventually they're going to think, well, maybe this person has some ideas on that. And then they start asking you questions about, well, how would you handle it? Why would you handle it that way? Have you ever done that? How did it turn out? And as the more mature discipler, you not only get to answer those questions, but you get to bring biblical principles into your answers. And now that's at the center of your conversation. That's how discipleship works. That's what
Amen.
Jesus did. That's the only reason that I think it works, is Jesus modeled that for us. And so the more that we can take that into our relationships with people who are willing to grow, maybe even have a desire to grow as a follower of Jesus, those are some of the important elements embedded in that process. Small groups don't facilitate that because every person in that group is at a different place on that continuum. Every person in that group needs personal attention. Every person in that group has to have a different approach, a different answer to what they're struggling with and how they're struggling with it and what they could be doing that would advance them on that pathway. And so this whole group thing, it's terrific for making us feel like we're part of, quote unquote, the church. That's great. But let's not confuse it with a discipleship program.
This episode of Rapid Response was brought to you by CTC Math. Visit them at ctcmath.com today.